Who taught you that dignity matters more than dollars?
The fact that they feel good about themselves is worth more to me than any money in the world.
How do we then human harder? And if you know that you are doing this for the right reasons, you can realize this vision.
What's a failure that has shaped your values as a leader?
The hustle and bustle and the trade and the entrepreneurship.
If there is one ripple that you would like this conversation to start, what would that be? I can think of quite a few instances where I felt unseen in systems that were designed for others, namely, the first time I had a leadership role at a relatively large nonprofit about 15 years ago. And because it was my first leadership opportunity, I was receiving a lot of advice from folks that were more seasoned than me. And it was advice like I had to own the room when I walked into it, be more forceful when I get into a physical space, raise my voice, be a lot more assertive and loud and speak at a lower tone, which sounded a lot to me like emulating a man, which I am not. And I was trying to do that for many years, but the more I did it, the more I felt inauthentic. And I think the people around me and my teams could also feel like it wasn't coming from an honest place. And a few years into that, I met someone who would later really become a close mentor, an advisor to me and a guide. And I still remember the day he called me out on it, and he just gave me permission to be authentic. And he literally told me, Sachi, just be yourself. You are enough, you are good, be yourself, and everything else will flow. And ever since then, I just tried to show up authentically.
I think one of the things that's really shaped me as a leader of failure I've seen in my space and the industry that I work in was, having grown up in India and Delhi as a kid, next to what was then the largest slum in India in the 80s, and come to the US where the concept of people living in poverty is, or was at least in the 80s, just poor people sitting by the side of the street just waiting for handouts and aid. And to me, I remembered the hustle and bustle and the trade and the entrepreneurship that went on in the slums. That's where we went to buy vegetables, that's where we went to buy all kinds of produce or our laundry, all the things. And so why is there a failure of imagination for how we serve, how we reach, how we see them as clients and customers versus poor people waiting for just handouts? And it wasn't until graduate school where I think a business school professor really helped to articulate that, C.K. Prahlad, that I was yes, this is what I've been trying to understand and grapple with between my childhood in India to growing up working on economic development and learning economics in school. And that market failure is where I want to work the most, because I have connection and empathy to those who have been failed by the markets, and I want to uplift them and their stories with dignity, not paint this picture of poor people that has existed for, I think, too long in America.
My grandfather, my father's father, was one of many people, but maybe the most influential, who taught me that dignity matters more than dollars. And the reason I say this is because my grandfather was also the first entrepreneur I had ever known in my life. I still remember as a little girl visiting India, visiting my entire extended family, sitting on my grandfather's lap, and he would tell me the stories of how he struggled when he was younger to build a business. He had found it really hard to find steady work. He had 9 children to feed, and almost that desperation made him try his hand at so many business ideas until one day he was successful In setting up a factory, he received investment for that factory and then grew it to create over 100 jobs in his town. And because of his success, he was then able to give his children better futures. And my father, as one example of that, was able to go to medical school, come to the US, where I was born a few years later. And now I've had so much of the opportunities and privilege of what it means to grow up in this country and with all that we are surrounded by. And my grandfather would always tell me to never take that for granted, because he had lived a life of struggle. He had tasted it. And I think if there's one thing he feared is that his grandchildren, the folks of my generation, because we were now removed from poverty ourselves, he was worried that we should never take it for granted and that we should always give back. And as an example of that, I saw every day that I was in his house, they had an open door policy, he and my grandmother. And people would walk into the house off the street. They knew everyone in town. If someone came by and was hungry, they would be fed. It didn't matter what their backgrounds were, where they came from. And I remember still being young and being a little innocent and asking my grandfather, well, isn't this a burden, or how can we afford to feed everybody? And what if they want to take too much? And what if we run out of food? Or this is how my little girl brain was working. And he said, the fact that they feel good about themselves and that they are ready to ask for my help is something that is worth more to me than any money in the world. And that really, really stood with me.
I think if I went back in time to tell my younger self one truth about at least what I've learned in the last few years of being a first-time CEO is believe in yourself. Like, you have a vision, and if you know that you are doing this for the right reasons, and I appreciated you sharing, your grandfather's story. I grew up with two grandfathers who marched for India's freedom and also never let me forget that. And between my grandfather, my mother's father, and my father, who was born before India was free, like, the values they instilled from a really young age to never forget what you come from and how hard we work to just gain liberation and freedom. And that my sister and I are the first generation of a liberated India, right? So how do we participate in helping design that economic liberation that comes after just colonial liberation? You have to believe then in this vision you have of what economic liberation means to the people who've been liberated. How do you imagine a future that doesn't yet exist, or pathways that haven't yet been created for our people? And it took me a long time to come to this, which is why, you go back in time, but to believe in yourself and that you can realize this vision. You don't have to come from a family with money we didn't. We were a moderate income immigrant family growing up in the US when we came over. Just by learning the skills that I was able to garner along the way, and with enough imagination and vision in the middle and courage, holding on to that vision and proving it out slowly, I think has completely shifted how I lead and how I integrate all aspects of my life. About 8 years ago, I moved back to Silicon Valley to relocate my family back here, and I had the privilege of working with who is really one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, Dr. Vivian Ming, to help her start her AI think tank, responsible AI think tank in Berkeley called Sokos Labs. And I was intentionally trying to learn, where are there opportunities to use and imagine technology and AI from more responsible or ethical use cases for the social impact work I've already cared about and I've worked on in my career. And when we met at Singularity University around executive fellowship I was in, the opportunity to work with her for 2 years really was such an enlightening moment, because we were able to research, like, where has AI been used to accelerate or perpetuate harm, including in the financial industry, lending, decision making, etc., when it is trained on data sets for what predict a successful loan, but in an industry that has created historical harm, discrimination, and redlining in the very communities that we as community development financial institutions or impact investors are meant to serve. And if that is the case, how do I then learn enough about this tool, this AI, different tools of AI, to be able to reimagine and redesign them for impact work versus against the kind of impact work I care about? And so that's really been part of the intention of bringing this more and more into PCV.
The light bulb had really gone off for me in a nonprofit that I had helped to co-found and lead for over a decade. And this nonprofit called Upaya Social Ventures, we invest in small businesses in India to create dignified jobs. And what was really important as part of our work was, from day one, even when we had a very small budget, was that we wanted to collect feedback from the people we were creating jobs for, because we did not want to take it for granted that the business owners, the job numbers they report, were all going to be good, dignified jobs. Mm-hmm. We did believe our entrepreneurs, but we also just wanted to hear what the job holders had to tell us. And it was often very, very positive feedback, but sometimes they would have really good ideas for how that job quality would be improved. Sometimes they were facing issues that had never come to the surface before, or that perhaps they were a little timid about telling their direct boss about, because they weren't quite sure how it would be received. And so when we saw that when they were talking to an objective third party, someone from our team, they would often talk at length about the ideas they had and what they liked and disliked about their jobs. Now, for about 10 years in that context, we would collect this feedback by sending human beings into sometimes very rural parts of India and sit down and do one-on-one interviews with these job holders. And I am talking about things like they would have tape recorders with them. Sometimes they would be able to transcribe what these job holders were telling them. But then those transcripts had to be read, reviewed, coded. And it was just a very long and laborious process. Now, over the last few years, with all the advances in technology, we have seen that instead of going through a survey process and an interviewing process like that, that would just take weeks and sometimes months on end, we can deploy questions and surveys over phones, have these job holders speak their answers just like they would face-to-face with an interviewer, but then have AI synthesize all of that voice feedback and basically within minutes present to us, the survey administrators, what are the big themes that are coming up? What are the topics that people are touching on? Where are they expressing positive sentiment or negative sentiment or anxiety? And by getting all of that synthesized and structured, it is so much easier to share the high-level findings back with our business owners and then get into action mode, right? Work with them to say, how can we make good jobs even better? And so I think just the fact that technology now can help cut our costs by sometimes 80, 90% and bring down the time that is required from weeks and months to just minutes is so powerful. And now there should be no excuse for us not to really listen to the people that we're serving.
I remember when we first used ICA, to do the worker voice surveys with our Good Jobs Fellows cohort in 2023, I think, early
Yes.
23. And being able to bring back to our group of 20 small business owners what their workers in aggregate had answered in these worker voice surveys was so enlightening, because beyond those who might, ask all kinds of questions of their workers, to your point, there's always, as an employer, there's always certain things they may or may not tell you, or level of detail, or, such trust-wise. And being able to bring them in aggregate, here's how your workers are actually feeling about these specific job quality attributes or questions, and here's how they might want to prioritize where, if and when you have margins in the business that if you're thinking about that next piece of job quality you might be able to add in your business, what you prioritize versus what they might be prioritizing. And, whatever you decide to do with that as an employer, and whatever you think you can afford based on the fact that you know your numbers better than most of your workers ever will, it's the insightfulness to be able to then activate that for impact in a way that you couldn't have before was really insightful.
One example of how powerful this can be, because sometimes I get feedback from folks that haven't used tools like this that say, well, it is really easy for me to quickly draw up a survey and blast out a survey to people. But if you're thinking about traditional, what I like to call quantitative surveys, where you are asking people multiple choice questions, or even maybe asking them to write in a few short words that comprises their feedback, traditional surveys miss a lot of nuance. It is a very different thing when you turn on a microphone and you ask someone to talk about what is on their mind. So many gems come up. And so as part of that Good Jobs Fellows research exercise that we did with the PCV, one of the most interesting insights came from when we talked to business owners about if and how they were providing wealth building benefits and retirement benefits to their workers. And then we asked workers the same thing, like, how do you think about wealth building? And how are you saving up for retirement or saving up for your dreams? And we compared the answers. And again, both sides were freely talking, voice-based responses, right? And the employers, most of them, those that were not offering 401k programs or wealth building vehicles, they were all really focused on the fact that they had not activated 401k accounts. And they were openly saying, I bet my employees are concerned and upset that I haven't done this yet. And there are all these reasons for why we haven't given them 401k accounts. But the 401k account was the biggest topic that was coming up for employers.
I remember that.
From the workers, however, they were saying, yes, I don't really think of my job as the vehicle through which I am necessarily going to build wealth. However, the one time my employer invited a financial services company to come and give us some training or a workshop that just kind of demystified a lot of these terms, or gave us some tips for how to invest in the market or how to save more regularly, that was such an eye-opener for me. And I just wish my employer would give us access to more clinics or give us access to financial advisors. And over 3/4 of workers talked about clinics and advice, not 401k accounts. So imagine if we had just deployed a regular old survey that said, do you provide 401k accounts, yes or no? We would have only scratched the surface of the richness of what workers were actually asking for.
I think one of the strongest ways that PCV and our team tries to do the co-creation by, for, and with community is just to listen, to constantly sort of follow up and build relationships with our community partners, our entrepreneurs also, and just different stakeholders who really impact the ecosystem in a community, much like Oakland, where we're based. How do we get closest and most proximate to the challenges our micro and small business entrepreneurs are facing, that their workers are facing? And we may or may not work on all aspects of those challenges, but where we can, how do we partner with others who work, somewhere along that continuum from housing, direct service to grants, boot camps, accelerators, micro, small business growth, etc. What can we learn from what works and doesn't work from them? And how then do we work to listen to that feedback from both partners and entrepreneurs to co-create what we and they collectively as a community think needs to be designed, and how then it shows up and gets deployed and democratized. That's a lot of how we've tried to design our Oakland Fund 1 originally, our Oakland Fund 2 that deployed, just finished deploying this past couple of months. We're working on Restore LA, very much, again, trying to listen to community partners and entrepreneurs and where their needs are and what's working and not working.
So I think mission-driven investing is most definitely harder than traditional venture capital or private equity practices. And I have been in this line of work for over 15 years because I think it is, despite being so much harder, it is so much more rewarding. And I want to first talk about all the ways I think it's different, or just harder in general. Harder because when you're in traditional venture capital, there are a lot of tried and true frameworks and methodologies and templates. As VCs, there is so much shared pipeline. There is a huge community of VCs all over the world. The way they share their deal flow, if one entrepreneur isn't quite right for them, they get passed along to one of their friends that also in the VC space. And so I think there's a very dynamic pipeline building and very dynamic ecosystem there. And it's much harder to find that in the mission-driven space. Yes, for the few other funders that are like us, and there's really only a handful that really invest in the places where we invest. Yes, we do have that deal flow, but it's just not going to be at the scale that a VC would have. Secondly, in the VC space, you talk so much about things like the 2 in 20 model and how your funds have to be structured. And really, all of that jargon means that you're going to make a bunch of bets and then you're going to have this one unicorn that makes your entire fund work and produce returns, right? We don't have the luxury of having that one unicorn that's just going to make our entire fund work, because everything we invest in with a mission-driven lens has to have impact attached to it. We cannot forgive some of our investments for not having impact and one having runaway impact. That's not how it works for us. Not only do we have to make all the investments work from a financial return perspective, because we want to try to get our money back so it can keep doing more good in the communities, but we also have to make sure that each and every investment has a very compelling and appropriate impact attached to it. And of course, we have to measure that impact. And that is a whole other separate discussion and, very rich conversation about how we do that, because that's very difficult. However, despite how hard this kind of work is, I have found time and time again that when you do take on the effort of doing the due diligence, finding those diamonds in the rough, that I like to call them, that other people might pass up, you have a really dedicated and a loyal friend for life. I have friends, very close friends, who are entrepreneurs that one of my funds maybe 10 years ago invested in. And we were the only people willing to take a bet on this entrepreneur. But because we did, they have now grown tenfold. This one entrepreneur I'm thinking of right now has created 5,000 jobs over the last decade. And I still hear from them on a quarterly basis. And we have just forged a tight friendship because of the trust and the relationship we built through that investing relationship. And I don't see that in the traditional private equity space. And I think those relationships, that trust is everything.
Part of why, for me and for PCV, the focus on job quality as an economic dignity importance or imperative is really because, particularly as we enter the age of AI and these tools accelerate into our communities, how do we use them for our benefit and not necessarily between the forces of capitalism, the forces of technology, be used by them? And, we say amongst our staff, how do we then human harder, right? How do we use them where we need to use them as tools? But how do we then unleash our creative potential, our imagination, the things that most make us human to lift up other humans? And that is a dignity story, right? That is, and in our case, as investors in small businesses who care about good quality jobs that lead to economic mobility, that is really a dignity story, I think.
Yes, and these tools help us collect those voices and what those voices are telling us so much faster and easier. And it makes it so much easier to get all of those inputs that we so badly need, right?
No excuse to not have the listening feedback loop
Exactly.
to do the human-centered design we talk a lot about at PCV. I think the Radiant Data Hub becoming PCV's newest team is going to allow us to really understand our own data to serve our communities better, and will help all of the organizations in our field who want to be improving that mission, deepening that mission, even in these challenging times, be able to actually understand their own data to serve the communities we all want to be serving better.
So I completely agree with that vision for the Radiant Data Hub. And I think another really exciting element that the hub can do that no one individual CDFI can do on its own, no matter how much data and AI talent it has within it, is the power of this data in aggregate. So when we are able to bring together data and historical transactions from so many CDFIs across the country, and we put it into one place, there are so many insights that it can help us generate about how, what are the factors behind successful lending outcomes based on communities or based on certain groups. And the thing about using machine learning and AI effectively is that all of these methodologies, all of these technologies are very greedy. They are very data hungry. They need thousands and thousands and thousands of data points, which no CDFI in America has the amount of data required to build some of the most, predictive models or some of the most sophisticated algorithms. But as a collective, we most certainly can.
So with firewalls protecting each other's data from each other,
Yes.
given the cybersecurity protocols that the Data Hub is setting up as you come into PCV, how do we each, if we are an industry born out of the economic failure of formal financial institutions being able to serve our communities, if we have been designed for 30 years to intentionally serve low and moderate income communities or communities that have been left out of financial access, how do we then learn in aggregate what has worked within our own portfolios that collectively could really leapfrog for each of us? What is that phrase? The sum of our parts are greater than the whole. What could we be learning as a collective that could really leapfrog our industry to be serving even more underserved communities and entrepreneurs in these times?
Yes, all of this data will be firewalled, of course, and protected. It'll also be de-identified because we really want to, once again, respect that data autonomy. So I would say first and foremost, it is really important to compensate individuals and communities for the feedback that they provide to us. Again, way too often in our day-to-day lives, our data is being used or taken or being used for purposes we might not have a lot of control over, and is being monetized far away from us. We actually cannot tap into the value of the data we ourselves are creating. And so one of the things that we built into ICA from the very beginning is a way to provide financial compensation for people to take time out of their day and answer surveys and give us feedback. So I think that is one very good way of respecting dignity in data. And number two, similar to what we were talking about a little bit before, it is sharing everything that we learn right back with the people that gave us that feedback and that data in the first place, and then inviting them to also help us think through what we are hearing to co-create those solutions. And we are in a really good position to amplify what they are telling us so that we can catch the attention of whether it's funders, investors, larger corporates who are thinking of, well, how do we serve these communities that haven't really been in our portfolio? We can be that bridge to say, hey, this is what our market is telling us. These are the products and services they need, and how can we help forge more of those connections so that our communities really benefit?
I mean, a lot of our entrepreneurs were already starting to see leverage AI tools to build websites, build better products to customers. In fact, we had an entrepreneur reach out to us last month who asked ChatGPT to find him investors who would invest in his small business. And he found PCV through ChatGPT results.
Interesting.
And he shared with us his whole ChatGPT results when he reached out to ask about PCV's lending. And it was so fascinating. I had never actually searched up PCV on ChatGPT. And so just seeing the way that they summarized talking about Pacific Community Ventures, I was impressed. I was impressed that it got our mission. It got the heart of how we try to show up, and the partnerships part. It was much more nuanced than I think I would have expected. There's my implicit bias right there. Implicit bias with AI. Interesting. But if that can bring down the cost of a transaction for an entrepreneur trying to research and find capital, when in fact what we want them to be doing most is being able to focus on their business, right? And why they started that business to begin with, whatever their vision is that they were trying to birth into the world, that's the creative imagination we need our entrepreneurs to be freed up to do, right? That's where innovation comes from in any economy, in any country. That is where new ideas are generated, new industries. And so we're already starting to see that. And I think in this case, entrepreneurs working with PCV can expect to see that by bringing down the timelines of transactions, being able to get to yes even faster than PCV already, does. Being able to get more customized user experiences, particularly as we start building in generative AI into our business advising platform or our Good Jobs toolkit, that based on where they are and meeting them where they are, how do we then customize their experience of affordable capital, technical assistance, mentorship to actually get them on economic mobility, climate resilience outcomes, while freeing up more of their time to imagine and create, and why they got into the business to begin with.
First of all, I envision that if we have built a good, solid, robust data hub, that we will have hundreds of CDFIs all over the country plugged in with data and AI and machine learning talent at their fingertips. We would have helped automate so much of what is just grunt work and the rote stuff, the drudgery. We have helped free up their creative human potential. We have helped these CDFI partners of ours human harder, as you like to say. And what humaning harder as a CDFI to me means is that instead of being chained to your desk and having to process a lot of paper, and because you're cutting and pasting application information and trying to determine very manually if someone gets a loan or doesn't, or you're just buried in the paperwork of it all, instead of all of that, we have the staff of underwriting teams are actually walking around. They're out and about in their communities. They are meeting business owners. They are having conversations. They are understanding what business owners' hopes and dreams are and what they're struggling with. They're building these relationships so that they get all of that tacit information, and they keep that in mind when they are making their investment decisions. And so that as they continue building these networks, it's not just about funding entrepreneurs, it's about connecting entrepreneurs with mentors, with other companies that can support them. It is, again, like I keep saying over and over again, really getting their feedback and internalizing that feedback so that we keep making our products and services better. So it's a much more vibrant, active, human-to-human community that I am seeing, much less about paper and forms and the things that are quite honestly occupying us today.
So if I can summarize what I heard back to our earlier part of our conversation, success for Radiant Data Hub at PCV 5 years out really looks like us actually actively being able to co-found and co-write the new American social contract by humaning harder with the ecosystem of folks in our own community.
Yes.
Comma, powered by AI.
I love that. I love that.
I think what I hope to spark with the announcement of our new strategic plan, the Radiant Data Hub, coming into PCV is imagination and hope. In this very challenging time for our CDFI partners, our communities that we serve, the entrepreneurs that we serve and partner with, there is no lack of challenge, worry, concern, whether it is economic, whether it is political, whether it is how will they be able to, keep their families on the health and well-being journeys that they got into that business to start with, whether they're incomepreneurs or small and growing businesses. And the ability to then be able to say, we are now building a strategy and an expertise with these tools to be able to hold the impact-first, values-centered, both capital with the lending that we're doing, the technical assistance with the wraparound supports we have, to actually get to social, economic, and climate outcomes that we all want to have for our families, our grandchildren, our communities, really inspires me. And I think my biggest hope is that we are able to really showcase and partner with others to help them to also then reimagine and expand more hope to their communities by being able to leverage these tools in ways that help us hold and deepen our missions in this time.